Tied up in the cold, she closed her eyes, thinking no one would ever hear her last breath. 2 boys dreamed of her cries and, at dawn, were guided to the sound of her pain. They saved her, and without knowing it, they sparked a miracle that would change the destiny of many. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The dawn arrived silently over Chicago, bringing with it that fine, persistent drizzle that seemed in no hurry to leave. The streets of the Lincoln Park neighborhood were still asleep, wrapped in a gray mist that hid the outlines of the old brownstones and the imposing oak trees that stood like guardians of long-forgotten stories. It was one of those days when the cold seeped into your bones and the entire city seemed to shrink under the weight of a low, heavy sky. Eleanor no longer felt the cold, or maybe she felt it so intensely that her body could no longer distinguish between temperature and pain. Lying on the damp earth behind the high wall of Graceland Cemetery, she tried to keep her eyes open, but her eyelids were as heavy as if they carried all the weariness of her 74 years. The ropes on her wrists and ankles had left deep marks, and every small movement tore a groan from her that was lost in the emptiness of the early morning. How had she gotten here? The question echoed in her confused mind, mixing with fragments of memory that appeared and disappeared like shadows. She remembered the spacious living room of her house in the Gold Coast, the velvet curtains she herself had chosen decades ago, the smell of freshly brewed coffee that always perfumed the mornings. She also remembered the evasive glances, the conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the hands that guided her with excessive firmness, as if she were a fragile object that needed to be moved out of the way. Robert. The name of her eldest son came to her mind with painful clarity. Robert, with his always impeccable suit and his eyes that had lost the warm glow of childhood. When had he started looking at her as if she were a burden, a problem to be solved? Eleanor tried to remember, but the images blurred. There was a meeting, low voices discussing numbers and documents. There was also Patricia, her youngest, who had always been sweeter, closer, but who in recent months seemed to have built an invisible wall between them. The fine rain began to fall more intensely, and Eleanor felt the cold drops touch her face. It was strange how, in that final moment, her mind seemed more lucid than it had been in weeks. The confusing memories that had tormented her during the day gave way to a terrible, crystal-clear understanding. Her own children had decided she should no longer exist. It had been so gradual that she had barely noticed. First, there were the medications that left her mind foggy, making her lose track of time and confuse faces. Then, the visits from the private doctor, that man with a cold smile who jotted everything down on a clipboard and murmured technical words that sounded like sentences. Eleanor had overheard fragments of conversations she shouldn't have, about guardianship, about having her declared incompetent, about how it would be better for everyone if she simply stopped being an obstacle. An obstacle. The word echoed in her head with a cruelty that cut deeper than any blade. She who had dedicated her entire life to those two, who had given up so many dreams to ensure they had the best, who had worked side by side with her husband to build the company now worth millions, had become an obstacle. A body too old, a voice that questioned too much, a presence that complicated plans she wasn't supposed to know about. The most recent memory was hazy and fragmented. She remembered being taken from her house late at night, with the excuse of an urgent doctor's appointment. Robert was behind the wheel, silent and tense. Eleanor had tried to ask where they were going, but the words came out jumbled and her son simply ignored her. The car drove through deserted streets until it stopped near the cemetery. There was another person waiting, a man she didn't recognize. Firm hands pulled her from the vehicle. She tried to scream, but her throat produced no sound. And then, the darkness, the cold earth, the ropes tightening on her skin. How many hours had passed since then? Eleanor didn't know. The sky was beginning to lighten timidly, tinting the clouds a softer gray. She felt her body growing, cold, her strength leaving her little by little. She closed her eyes and for the first time in decades tried to pray. The words came with difficulty, stumbling in her tired mind. She didn't ask for revenge. She didn't ask for justice. She only asked for a little more time. Time to understand. Time to somehow not let this be her final story. While Eleanor fought against the cold and silent despair, on the other side of the city, in a simple house in the Bridgeport neighborhood, two boys woke up at the same time, their hearts racing and their breath short. Gabriel and Raphael, 12-year-old twins, sat up in their narrow beds and looked at each other through the gloom of the small room they shared. They didn't need to say anything. The dream had been the same. An elderly woman, tied up, crying softly next to a mist-covered wall. Her face was turned to the sky, and silent tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. She wasn't screaming, not calling for help, just crying, like someone who has given up on being heard. In the dream, the boys could feel the cold that enveloped her, could sense the pain emanating from that abandoned body. And somehow, inexplicably, they knew exactly where she was. Gabriel was the first to lie back down, pulling the blanket up to his chin. His brother did the same. Neither of them said a word about what they had seen. In their grandmother Josephine's house, dreams weren't a topic for hasty conversations. The woman who had raised them since their mother passed away 3 years earlier had taught the boys that there were ordinary dreams and dreams that came from another place. The latter required silence, attention, and above all the courage to act when necessary. When dawn truly arrived, bringing with it the smell of coffee and buttered toast from the kitchen, Gabriel and Raphael got up slowly, washed their faces in the cold tap water, and went to help their grandmother prepare breakfast. Josephine, a 68-year-old woman who carried the responsibility of raising 2 grandsons alone on her shoulders, looked at the boys with that sharp perception that only grandmothers seem to have. She noticed the dark circles under their eyes, the way they avoided looking directly at each other, the silence that wasn't typical of the morning rush. "Did you boys sleep well?" The question was soft but loaded with intention. Gabriel stirred his coffee with more attention than necessary. Raphael bit into his toast, chewing slowly. The answer came in unison, too quick to be entirely true. "Yeah, Grandma." Josephine didn't press. She just nodded, pouring more coffee into the old mugs and saying the brief prayer that always accompanied the first meal of the day. As she prayed, she kept her eyes open, watching her grandsons. Something was different that morning, and she knew her boys well enough to know that eventually the truth would come out. After breakfast, Gabriel and Raphael put on their simple jackets and picked up the small bouquet of wildflowers they had gathered the day before. It was Saturday, and the boys' routine included a visit to the cemetery where their mother was buried. It wasn't an obligation imposed by their grandmother, but a habit they had created themselves, a way to keep the connection alive with the one who, even absent, remained a constant presence in their lives. Josephine watched her grandsons leave, their small figures disappearing down the cobblestone street under the persistent drizzle. She went back inside, but something in her chest tightened. A nameless unease, a premonition that made her hands tremble slightly as she washed the coffee cups. She lit a candle before the image of the Virgin Mary that occupied a special corner in the modest living room and murmured a prayer, asking for protection for the boys. Gabriel and Raphael walked in silence through the still deserted neighborhood streets. The cemetery was a 20-minute walk, a route they knew by heart, but that morning it felt different. The air was thicker, the silence heavier, and both felt an urgency they couldn't explain. When they reached the main gate, still, closed at that hour, they went around the high wall as they always did, heading to a side entrance they knew was left open for the early arriving staff. The cemetery was deserted, shrouded in a thick fog that made the headstones and cypress trees even more somber. The boys followed the dirt path, their steps leaving light marks on the damp surface. They reached the simple grave plot where their mother rested, placed the wildflowers in the small ceramic vase, and stood there for a few minutes in silence, each lost in their own memories and prayers. It was as they were preparing to leave that they heard it. A faint groan, almost imperceptible, coming from somewhere beyond the back wall. Gabriel froze. Raphael squeezed his brother's arm. The sound came again, a little clearer this time, and they both recognized it immediately. It was the same cry from the dream they'd had. Fear came first, as it always does. The boys' hearts pounded, and for a moment they both considered just running away, going back home, pretending they hadn't heard anything. But something stronger kept them there, a force from within that seemed to whisper that ignoring that sound would be to betray everything they had learned about what was right and wrong. Gabriel looked at Raphael. Raphael looked at Gabriel. They said nothing, but the decision was made. Together, they walked to the back wall, found a spot where some stones had loosened, creating makeshift footholds, and with effort they climbed to the top. On the other side, a vacant lot covered in tall weeds and accumulated trash stretched as far as the eye could see under the fog. And there, near the wall, they saw her. An elderly woman, lying on the muddy ground, her clothes torn and dirty, her white hair stuck to her pale face. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose and fell in irregular movements. Around her wrists and ankles, thick ropes left red and purple marks. The scene was exactly as it had been in the dream, so precise it was frightening. The boys scrambled down the wall, stumbling in the tall grass but not stopping. When they got close to Eleanor, Gabriel knelt beside her while Raphael stood, looking around as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The woman slowly opened her eyes, and when her gaze met the boys' young faces, something seemed to awaken within her. "It's okay, we're going to help you." Gabriel's voice came out shaky but determined. His small hands began to work on the knots of the ropes, which were tight and damp, difficult to undo. Raphael joined his brother, and together they struggled with the knots while Eleanor watched them with a mixture of disbelief and hope. When they finally managed to free her wrists and ankles, Eleanor tried to move but couldn't. Her body simply wouldn't respond. The boys looked at each other, worry etched on their young faces. Raphael remembered the water bottle they always carried and took it out of his worn backpack. Carefully, he helped the woman take small sips, holding her head gently. Gabriel took off his own jacket, the one his grandmother had patched so many times, and covered Eleanor's trembling body. "Can you stand up, ma'am?" She tried, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. The boys didn't hesitate. Each put one of Eleanor's arms over their shoulders, held her waist firmly, and slowly helped her to her feet. The walk back was slow and difficult. Eleanor leaned on the boys with all the weight her frail body still had, and with every step it seemed she would fall. But Gabriel and Raphael didn't let go for an instant. As they walked, they prayed in low voices, the same prayers their grandmother Josephine had taught them, simple words asking for strength and protection. And something inexplicable happened. With each murmured prayer, Eleanor felt as if a subtle energy was coursing through her body, as if the strength that had abandoned her was slowly beginning to return. It took them almost an hour to reach Josephine's house. When they finally saw the modest brick building, with its ceramic-tiled roof, the boys were exhausted but didn't slow their pace. They climbed the 3 front steps with effort, and before they could even knock, the door opened. Josephine was there, as if she had been waiting. Her face showed no surprise at seeing her grandson supporting an elderly woman covered in mud and wounds. Her eyes just shone with a deep understanding, and she stepped back from the door, making a silent gesture for them to enter. "Take her to the back room," she said simply, her voice calm but filled with urgency. The boys obeyed, leading Eleanor to the small room that was once used to store old boxes and clothes their grandmother sewed to sell. Josephine had already prepared the narrow bed with clean sheets, as if she knew they would be needed. She helped Eleanor lie down, covered her with a thick wool blanket, and lit a tall candle that she placed on the small table beside the bed. As she carefully cleaned Eleanor's wounds with warm water and a clean cloth, Josephine murmured continuous prayers. Gabriel and Raphael watched from the doorway, still breathless from the effort, their eyes fixed on this scene. That seemed to have been pulled from some strange dream. The candle flame flickered suddenly, sputtered as if it would go out, and then stabilized, burning with a greater intensity than before. Josephine paused for a moment, looked at the candle, and then at Eleanor. Her lips moved in a silent prayer. She then turned to her grandsons and gestured for them to come closer. "You did the right thing, boys. Today, you were instruments of something greater. Don't be afraid." Her grandmother's voice was firm, comforting, and the boys felt the tension in their shoulders relax a little. "Eleanor, who had remained silent since entering the house, slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze swept over the simple room, the peeling walls, the ceiling with water stains, the old but clean furniture. Then her eyes rested on the three faces watching her with genuine concern. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so weak it could barely be heard. "Thank you for not letting me die alone." Josephine took Eleanor's hand in hers, calloused from so many years of hard work. "You're not going to die, not today. God still has plans for you. Rest now. We'll take care of everything." And there was so much conviction in her words that Eleanor, for the first time since waking up bound and abandoned, felt something like hope. The morning advanced slowly. Gabriel and Raphael were instructed by their grandmother not to tell anyone what had happened, at least not yet. There was something about the situation that called for caution, for secrecy. Josephine knew the world well and knew that people don't end up tied up behind cemeteries by accident. There was a story there, probably a dangerous one, and she needed to understand it better before taking any action. While Eleanor rested, falling into a deep sleep for the first time in days, Josephine sat in the living room with her grandsons. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And the boys told her about the dream they'd had, about the strange feeling that had accompanied them all the way to the cemetery, about how they heard the groan from the exact spot the dream had shown them. Josephine listened in silence, nodding occasionally, her hands busy peeling potatoes for lunch. When the boys finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her gaze lost on the window that looked out onto the small backyard where she grew a few vegetables. "You know what this means, don't you?" Gabriel and Raphael looked at each other, not entirely sure what their grandmother meant. "It means you were chosen to make a difference in this woman's life. And when God chooses someone for a mission, He doesn't choose by chance. He chooses because He sees something special, something pure in that person's heart." The boys didn't answer, but something in their chests swelled with a feeling that was hard to name. Pride, perhaps, or responsibility, or simply the understanding that their lives had changed that morning in a way they couldn't yet fully comprehend. In the large house in the Gold Coast, Robert woke up with the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. He looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was almost 10 in the morning. He got up, put on his silk robe, and went down to the kitchen where he found Patricia drinking coffee, her eyes fixed on her phone. They exchanged a brief glance. Neither of them mentioned their mother. Neither of them asked about the previous night. It was as if, by silent agreement, they had decided some things were better left unsaid. Patricia was the first to break the silence. "Do you think he did it right?" Her voice was low, almost ashamed. Robert poured himself some coffee, his hands trembling slightly. "He did what needed to be done. She wasn't going to get better, you know that. She was getting worse, more confused. It was a matter of time before something happened. This was better, quicker, less suffering." The words sounded rehearsed, as if Robert had repeated that speech to himself dozens of times until he believed it. Patricia nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed the doubt that was eating away at her. "Do you think she felt it? Do you think she was scared?" Robert slammed his cup on the counter harder than he intended. "I don't want to talk about it, Patricia. It's done. It's over. Now we move on and take care of the paperwork, the estate, everything that needs to be handled." But Patricia couldn't move on so easily. All morning, as she tried to busy herself with household chores, her mind kept returning to the last time she saw her mother, the confused look, the trembling hands reaching for something invisible. Did Eleanor know on some deep level what was about to happen? Did she feel the betrayal coming from those she should have trusted most of all? Meanwhile, in the back room of the humble house in Bridgeport, Eleanor began to stir. Her body still ached. Every muscle seemed to protest the slightest movement, but her mind was strangely clear. She looked around, trying to understand where she was, and slowly the memories of the morning returned. The boys, the rescue, the simple house, the kind grandmother. She tried to sit up and groaned softly with the effort. Immediately the door opened, and Josephine entered carrying a tray with hot soup and bread. "Easy now, dear. The body needs time to recover." The older woman helped Eleanor sit up more comfortably, placed pillows behind her back, and offered her the soup with careful spoonfuls. As she ate slowly, Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. They weren't tears of pain, but of something much more complex: gratitude, shame, confusion, relief, all mixed into an emotion that tightened her throat and made her chest burn. "Why did you help me?" The words came out between stifled sobs. "You don't even know me." Josephine wiped Eleanor's tears with the corner of her apron. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because my grandsons were guided to you for a reason. In this house, we believe that nothing happens by chance. You were put in our path because it was meant to be, and now you're safe, you can rest without fear." But Eleanor couldn't rest. Her mind was racing, processing the horror of what had happened, the betrayal of her children, the certainty that she had almost died alone and forgotten. And at the same time, she was trying to understand this impossible turn of events, these two boys who had found her just when she had lost all hope. "My children," Eleanor began, her voice choked with emotion. "It was my children who did this to me." Josephine didn't seem surprised. She just nodded, her hands busy arranging the blanket over Eleanor's legs. "Do you want to talk about it?" Eleanor hesitated. Part of her wanted to scream, to expose all the rottenness she had discovered hidden within her own family. But another part felt ashamed, a deep shame for having raised people capable of such cruelty. "They wanted my money, my house, everything my husband and I built together." The words began to pour out, stumbling over one another. Eleanor told her about the last few months, about how she had started to notice changes in her children's behavior, about the frequent visits from a private doctor who asked strange questions and prescribed medications that left her mind foggy. She told her about the documents she had signed without fully understanding, about the conversations she overheard in fragments, always cut short when they noticed her presence. Josephine listened in silence, and on her face, Eleanor saw something she hadn't expected. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. As if this simple woman who lived in a modest house and was raising two grandsons alone perfectly understood the complexity of the pain Eleanor carried. When the story ended, Josephine took Eleanor's hand again. "You are not to blame for what they became. No one controls another's heart, not even a mother. What you need now is to get stronger, to recover your strength. Then we'll think about what to do." But what to do? Eleanor felt lost. Not even knowing where to begin, she had no ID, no proof, no allies. Her own children had made sure to isolate her from friends and acquaintances in recent months, always with plausible excuses about her delicate health. Who would believe her now? Who would take the word of an elderly woman against two respected business people in the city? The afternoon slowly fell over Chicago, bringing with it an even lower temperature and a fine rain that seemed to have no end. In the Bridgeport house, the candle Josephine had lit continued to burn, its flame steady and constant. Gabriel and Raphael returned to watch Eleanor from a distance, their young minds trying to process everything that had happened on that strange and transformative day. That night, as Eleanor finally managed to get some more peaceful sleep, lulled by the sound of the rain on the roof and the sense of security that humble house provided, Josephine stayed awake longer. Sitting in her rocking chair in the living room, looking at the still burning candle, she prayed softly, asking for guidance on what to do. She knew she couldn't just hide Eleanor there forever. Sooner or later someone would come looking, and when that happened she needed to be prepared. But now on that rainy Saturday night in Chicago, 3 lives had intertwined in a way none of them could have predicted. An elderly woman who had survived the worst kind of betrayal, a grandmother who opened her home and her heart without hesitation, and 2 boys who learned very early that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always necessary. In the back room, Eleanor opened her eyes one more time before finally falling asleep. Through the small window, she could see the rain falling under the faint light of the street lamp. For a moment she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet. The pain of betrayal was too recent, too deep to be healed so quickly. But it was something like relief, the understanding that maybe, just maybe, there was still a purpose in continuing to breathe. She thought of the boys who had found her, of how their small hands had worked so carefully to undo the ropes that bound her. She thought of their grandmother, that woman with a serene gaze who asked no questions, passed no judgment, only welcomed her. Eleanor wasn't religious, at least not in the traditional sense. She hadn't set foot in a church in decades, didn't pray regularly, didn't seek spiritual comfort. But at that moment, wrapped in the wool blanket in that simple house, she felt that something greater had worked in her favor. Call it what you will, God, fate, coincidence, something had guided her to those 3 pure hearts when she needed it most. In the living room, Josephine finally blew out the candle, but not before observing how the flame had burned steady and constant for hours, without wavering once. It was a sign, she was sure. Not all was lost. Not all was decided. There was still a story to be told, a truth to be revealed, a justice to be served. And somehow she, her grandsons, and the wounded woman, now sleeping in her back room, were destined to be part of that story. Gabriel and Raphael, lying in their beds, couldn't sleep despite the day's exhaustion. They talked in whispers in the dark, recalling every detail of the extraordinary morning they had lived. "We saved a life today, Raph," Gabriel said, his voice filled with a seriousness not common in a 12-year-old. Raphael nodded in the dark. "Yeah, we did. But now what? What's going to happen to her?" Gabriel had no answer to that question. No one did. What none of them knew yet was that this was just the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of an entire family and reveal truths that some would do anything to keep buried. The dawn would bring new challenges, new questions, and decisions that would need to be made. But for now, on that cold and rainy night, the important thing was that Eleanor was still alive, and where there is life, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Sunday dawned differently. The rain had stopped during the night, giving way to a sky that was still overcast, but allowed a few shy rays of sun to break through the thick clouds. In the Bridgeport house, Josephine woke before dawn, as had been her custom for decades. She prepared coffee in silence, her movements precise and familiar in the small kitchen. As she waited for the water to boil, she glanced toward the back room where Eleanor was still sleeping. The night had been peaceful without incident. Josephine had checked on Eleanor a few times, always finding her in a deep sleep, breathing regularly. It was the sleep of someone who had finally allowed herself to rest after a long struggle. The older woman knew that this rest was necessary, not just for the bruised body, but especially for the wounded soul. When Gabriel and Raphael woke up, they found their grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee between her hands, and a thoughtful look they knew well. It was the look Josephine had when she was making important decisions, weighing consequences, planning the next steps. The boys sat down in silence, poured themselves coffee with milk and had buttered toast and waited. They knew their grandmother would speak when she was ready. "We need to talk about the lady you brought home yesterday." Josephine's voice was low but firm. Gabriel and Raphael nodded, their attention fully on her. "She's better today. Slept through the night, no apparent nightmares. But her body is very bruised. She'll need proper care, and here we have the bare minimum. Besides, from what she told me yesterday, her children are powerful people. If they find out she's alive and where she is, they might try something worse." The worry was evident on Josephine's face. Raphael was the first to speak. "We can't just hand her over to someone, Grandma. What if they send her back to her kids?" Gabriel completed his brother's thought. "Yeah, or what if they put her in a place where no one believes what she says?" Their grandmother sighed, knowing her grandsons were right. This was the exact dilemma that had kept her awake for much of the night. "I know, boys, that's why we need to be smart. We can't act in a hurry, but we can't wait too long either. First, we'll take care of her here until she's a little better. Then we'll think about seeking help from someone we can trust, someone who can ensure she'll be safe and that the truth will come out." "But who?" Gabriel asked. Josephine stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I have a few ideas. Let's see how things unfold." At that moment, the door to the back room opened slowly, and Eleanor appeared, leaning on the doorframe, still wrapped in the blanket, her face pale but her eyes more alert than the day before. She tried to take a few steps, but her legs trembled. Immediately, Gabriel and Raphael got up and went to help her, each carefully holding one of her arms. They brought her to the table and helped her sit down. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" Josephine asked, already getting up to pour coffee and get some fresh bread. Eleanor tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace of pain. "Better than yesterday. Everything still hurts, but at least I can think straight now." Her voice was hoarse but firmer than the day before as she took small sips of coffee. Her eyes scanned the simple kitchen, the old tiles, the small refrigerator humming softly, the three faces watching her with genuine concern. "I need to thank you again. You saved me. If it weren't for you, I'd be—" Eleanor's voice broke and tears began to stream down her face. Josephine reached across the table and held Eleanor's hand firmly. "You don't need to thank us all the time. What we need now is to understand exactly what happened and think about what to do. Do you feel ready to tell us everything from the beginning?" Eleanor nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. For the next hour, between pauses to drink water and regain her choked voice, she told her full story. She spoke of her husband, Arthur, to whom she had been married for 47 years. A hard-working man who had built a small construction supply company from scratch, which over time had grown and prospered. She spoke of how they raised Robert and Patricia, giving them everything they could: a quality education, opportunities, love. Arthur had passed away 5 years ago, the victim of a sudden and unexpected heart problem. Eleanor still got emotional talking about him, her voice filled with longing. "After he was gone, I took over the company with Robert. I didn't know much about the business, but I tried to learn. It was hard, but we were managing to keep things going, or at least that's what I thought." Gradually, Eleanor began to notice changes: meetings from which she was excluded with vague excuses, documents that Robert brought for her to sign, always in a hurry, always saying it was routine. Patricia, who worked as a lawyer in her own firm, started showing up at home, more often, always bringing new papers, always with that polite but firm manner of someone conducting important business. That's when the doctor appeared. Dr. Walter Carter, a private psychiatrist Robert had hired, saying he was worried about his mother's mental health. He began making weekly visits, always asking questions about her memory, about confusion, about her ability to make decisions. Eleanor didn't understand why. She felt fine, lucid, capable, but the doctor noted everything, conducted tests, prescribed medication. And the medication was the worst. It left my mind foggy, made me lose track of time. There were entire days I couldn't remember. Periods when I'd wake up not knowing how I got there. It was in that state that I signed more documents, many documents. Robert was always by my side, saying it was for my own good, to ensure everything would be protected if something happened to me. I only realized what was happening too late. I overheard a conversation between them, Robert and Patricia, late one night. They thought I was asleep because of the medication, but I had skipped that night's dose and was more alert. They were talking about how I was an obstacle, about needing to speed up the process, about money, a lot of money. Eleanor's voice trembled. They talked about me as if I didn't exist anymore, as if it were just a matter of time. Josephine, Gabriel, and Raphael listened in horrified silence. Eleanor continued, telling them how she had tried to confront her children the next day, but they denied everything, said she was confused because of the medication, that she was imagining things. They increased the dose. They began to isolate her more, preventing visits from old friends, saying she needed rest. And then on Friday night it happened. Robert said they needed to take me for an urgent appointment with Dr. Carter. I tried to resist, but he was firm. He practically carried me to the car. The rest is a blur in my memory. I remember the car stopping near the cemetery, hands pulling me out, being dragged, the pain of the ropes, and then the cold of the earth and the certainty that this would be my end. When Eleanor finished, a heavy silence filled the small kitchen. Gabriel had tears in his eyes. Raphael clenched his fists, anger evident on his young face. Josephine maintained her serene expression, but inside she was processing everything she had heard, calculating, planning. This doctor, Dr. Carter, do you know where his office is? Eleanor nodded. Downtown near Michigan Avenue. Josephine nodded, mentally filing the information. And the documents you signed, do you know what they were? Eleanor shook her head, shame evident on her face. No. I should have read them more carefully. I should have been suspicious. But they were my children. I trusted them. Trust is the most sacred thing there is, Eleanor. When someone breaks that trust, especially children breaking their parents' trust, it's one of the worst possible betrayals. But this is not your fault. You were manipulated, drugged, deceived. None of this is your fault. Josephine's words were firm, filled with conviction, and Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen a little. The day passed slowly. Eleanor was helped back to her room where she rested most of the time. Josephine applied ointment to her wounds, changed the makeshift bandages, and made sure Eleanor ate even when she wasn't hungry. Gabriel and Raphael stayed nearby, always attentive, ready to help with whatever was needed. It was mid-afternoon, while Josephine was praying the rosary. In the living room, that something strange happened. The candle she had lit that morning, which should have burned down hours ago, was still burning with the same intensity, as if it hadn't lost a single inch. Josephine paused her prayers and watched the candle for a long moment. It wasn't the first time she had seen something like this, but it was rare enough to confirm what she already suspected. Something special was happening here, something that went beyond human understanding. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Robert was starting to get nervous. He was waiting for a call that never came. He had arranged with the man he'd hired to call as soon as everything was taken care of, but the phone remained silent. He tried calling several times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. An unease began to grow in his chest. Patricia noticed her brother's tension. "Are you okay? You seem nervous." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was worried. "I'm waiting for a confirmation that hasn't arrived." Patricia didn't need to ask what confirmation. She knew exactly what her brother was talking about, and that knowledge weighed like lead on her conscience. "Do you think there was a problem?" she asked, her voice low. Robert shook his head, more to himself than to her. "There can't be. He's a professional. He's done this kind of thing before. He's probably just being cautious." But the certainty in his words sounded forced, and they both knew it. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened at Josephine's house. A neighbor, Evelyn, showed up at the door with a pot of food. She was a plump woman in her 70s, always smiling, who lived 3 houses down. "Josephine, I made a beef stew today and thought of you all. Brought you some to help out." The surprise on Josephine's face was genuine. The neighbor had never done anything like that before. As she took the pot and thanked her, Evelyn looked inside the house with curiosity. "I heard some different noises over here last night. Is everything okay?" Josephine kept her expression calm. "Everything's fine, Evelyn. Just had an unexpected visitor." The neighbor nodded, but her curious gaze didn't fade. "If you need anything, just let me know. We've been neighbors for so long, right? Anything at all, I'm here." After Evelyn left, Josephine stood thoughtfully. The neighbor's arrival was no coincidence. Something was moving, something invisible but palpable, as if Eleanor's presence in that house was creating ripples that reached the people around them. It wasn't frightening. It was comforting in a way, as if the universe were conspiring to help. At night, after the boys had gone to bed and Eleanor was resting again, Josephine sat in her rocking chair and allowed herself to think about the past. She remembered her own daughter, Claire, the mother of Gabriel and Raphael, a sweet girl who had grown into a strong and determined woman. Claire had worked as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, dedicating her life to caring for others. That's how she met Frank, a young and promising doctor. They fell in love, married too quickly, and the twins were born soon after. But Frank wasn't the man Claire thought he was. He drank too much, spent too much, and had a temper that could turn into a storm without warning. Josephine had tried to warn her daughter, but love blinds you to certain flaws. The marriage lasted 6 difficult years until Claire finally gathered the courage to ask for a separation and move back to her mother's house with the boys. Those were 2 good years after that. Claire got her smile back, the boys grew up surrounded by love, and life finally seemed to be settling down. But then came the illness. It started with a fatigue that Claire attributed to her demanding job, then the pains she tried to ignore. When she finally sought help, it was too late. The disease had silently consumed her body, and there was nothing left to do. Claire passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind 2 9-year-old boys and a heartbroken mother. Josephine took on raising her grandsons without hesitation, turning her grief into purpose. She taught the boys about faith, about kindness, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. And looking back, seeing how Gabriel and Raphael had acted upon finding Eleanor, Josephine felt proud. Claire would have been proud too. Maybe that's why the boys had that dream, Josephine thought. Maybe Claire herself, from wherever she was, had guided her sons to Eleanor. The idea brought comfort, a sense that there was a greater purpose in all of this, a tapestry being woven by invisible hands. On Monday, Josephine made a decision. She needed to seek help from someone who could really make a difference. She considered several options and decided to start with Father Anselm from St. Joseph's Church in the neighboring area. She had known the priest for many years. He was a man of integrity, who genuinely cared for his community and had enough connections to know who to turn to in delicate situations. She left Eleanor in the care of the boys, who had missed school with the excuse of having a cold, and walked to the church. It was a clear morning, and the walk did her good, helping to organize her thoughts. She found Father Anselm in the sacristy, preparing for the 10 o'clock Mass. "Father, I need to speak with you. It's urgent and delicate." Josephine's tone was serious enough that the priest immediately realized it wasn't a courtesy visit. "Let's go to my office, Josephine. We can talk more privately there." In the small office filled with books and religious images, Josephine told him everything. The boy's dream, the rescue of Eleanor, the story of betrayal and the attempt to leave her for dead. Father Anselm listened attentively, his usually calm face showing growing signs of shock and indignation. "This is extremely serious, Josephine. We're talking about a clear attempt to cause the worst to this woman. Her children must be held accountable." Josephine nodded. "I know, Father. But the situation is delicate. She has no proof, no documents, and it seems she was forcibly medicated to appear confused. If we simply take the case to the authorities, they might not believe her. They might even return her to her children, saying it's a family matter." The priest grew thoughtful, his fingers drumming on the desk. "I know someone who can help. Dr. Fernanda Davis, a social worker who specializes in cases of elder abuse. She's competent, discreet, and knows exactly how to proceed in these situations. I can contact her, if Eleanor agrees." Josephine felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was exactly the kind of help she had hoped to find. "There's one more thing, Father. Since this woman arrived at my house, I've seen signs. The candle that doesn't burn down, neighbors bringing food for no reason, as if they were guided to help." The priest smiled, a smile full of understanding. "Sometimes, Josephine, God works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this woman was destined to be saved, and perhaps your grandsons were the chosen instruments. Don't question miracles when they appear. Just be grateful and continue to do your part." Josephine returned home with a lighter weight on her shoulders. There was a plan now, a path forward. She told Eleanor about the conversation with the priest and about Dr. Davis. Eleanor, who was visibly stronger that day, able to walk around the room with less difficulty, nodded with gratitude. "I trust you, Josephine. Do what you think is best." That afternoon, Dr. Fernanda Davis appeared at the door. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with short hair, an attentive gaze, and a presence that conveyed both competence and empathy. Father Anselm explained the situation. "May I speak with Eleanor?" Josephine led her to the back room. What followed was a long and careful conversation. Dr. Davis asked specific questions, took notes on a tablet, examined the still visible wounds on Eleanor's wrists and ankles, and photographed the marks. Her face remained professional, but it was impossible not to notice the contained indignation in her eyes. "Eleanor, what they did to you is a serious crime. I will need to take your case to the district attorney's office and to Adult Protective Services. But before that, I need to ensure your safety and your health. I'll arrange for a complete medical examination, and I'll also begin a discreet investigation into your children and this Dr. Carter. Are you willing to give a formal testimony when the time comes?" Eleanor looked at her own hands, still marked by the ropes. For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes. Fear of confronting her children, fear that no one would believe her, fear of retaliation. But then she looked at Gabriel and Raphael, who were watching from the doorway, and remembered that those two boys hadn't hesitated to do what was right, even when they were afraid. How could she do any less? "Yes, I'm willing. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I know. They can't do this and get away with it. Not for me, but for other people who might be going through the same thing." Eleanor's voice came out firm, and Josephine smiled with pride. Dr. Davis stood up, putting the tablet in her bag. "I'll start today, for now, you. Stay here safe. Don't tell anyone your location. I'll arrange for a protective order and begin the investigation. This might take a few days, maybe weeks, but I promise you, we will get to the bottom of this." After the social worker left, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't the naive hope that everything would go back to the way it was, because she knew that was impossible. It was the hope that maybe, just maybe, justice was still possible, that there was still a way back to dignity. That night, for the first time since she arrived, Eleanor had dinner at the table with Josephine and the boys. The food was simple: rice, beans, shredded chicken, and a salad. But to Eleanor, it tasted like a feast. They talked about trivial things, about the weather, about stories the boys told from school. It was normalcy, something Eleanor thought she would never experience again. When night fell and everyone was getting ready for bed, Eleanor stood alone in the living room for a moment. She looked at the candle Josephine always kept lit, at the image of the Virgin Mary, at the comforting simplicity of that house. She felt tears come again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude. Outside, Chicago continued its nightly rhythm. Cars passed on the streets, lights turned on and off in houses, daily life went on. But in that small house in Bridgeport, something extraordinary was happening. A woman was being reborn from the ashes of betrayal. Two boys were learning about courage and compassion. And a wise grandmother was showing that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the simplest places. As Eleanor finally fell asleep peacefully, somewhere in the city, Robert checked his phone for the 100th time, his anxiety growing with each hour of silence. Something had gone wrong. He could feel it. And that certainty was beginning to poison his sleep, to invade his thoughts. Patricia was in the living room when Robert came in. Her brother had that look of someone about to explode. "You need to relax," she said. "Being like this won't help." "How do you expect me to relax? It's been over 48 hours and nothing." Robert ran a hand over his face, frustrated. "Tomorrow I'm going to find Michael in person." Michael was the man Robert had hired to solve the problem with his mother. Someone who did jobs other people didn't want to do. Robert had never known exactly what else Michael did, and he preferred not to ask. The next day, Tuesday, Josephine woke up with a strange feeling. She had dreamed of her daughter. Claire had appeared radiant, wearing that white dress she loved so much, and she was simply smiling. Josephine woke up with tears in her eyes, but they were good tears. Gabriel and Raphael also woke up differently. They told their grandmother they had dreamed of their mother too, each seeing the same scene. Claire in a garden full of flowers, smiling and pointing forward. "She's with us, boys. She's guiding us." Eleanor, who had overheard the conversation, felt her heart ache. She envied that love, that connection the family maintained even through loss. She compared it to her own children, and the difference was stark. The morning brought news. Dr. Davis called to say she had obtained a court order to access Eleanor's medical records and the files of Dr. Walter Carter. Things were moving, but they had to be careful. Around noon, something unexpected happened. Father Anselm appeared, at the door accompanied by another person, a simple-looking woman in her 50s, who introduced herself as Irene. Irene had worked as a housekeeper in Eleanor's home for years, until she was abruptly dismissed 6 months ago. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Irene, I remember you. I asked about you so many times, but they told me you had quit." The two women looked at each other, understanding dawning between them. "They got rid of me," Irene said. In the last few months before they let me go, I started noticing strange things. Mr. Robert giving you medication, Miss Patricia always bringing papers, and you getting more and more confused. Irene's testimony was crucial. She could confirm that Eleanor had been lucid before the medication, that something suspicious was happening, that her dismissal was to remove an inconvenient witness. That afternoon, Eleanor asked to speak with Gabriel and Raphael alone. I wanted to thank you again, not just for saving me, but for showing me that there's still goodness in the world. Your mother would be so proud. Gabriel smiled. We just did what we had to do. Raphael asked, Are you going to be okay now? Eleanor held the boy's small hands. I hope so. Thanks to you, I have a chance, and I'm not going to waste it. Meanwhile, Robert finally managed to locate Michael. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in the River North neighborhood. When Michael arrived, Robert noticed something was wrong. The man was pale, nervous. Sit down. Tell me what happened. Michael was silent before speaking. It went wrong. I took her to the agreed-upon place. But when I went back the next morning, she was gone. Someone took her. Robert felt his blood run cold. What do you mean, who? Michael shrugged. I don't know, but she's not there anymore. I went back 3 times to make sure. Robert felt panic rising. If someone had found his mother, if she had told them what happened, he was finished. Are you absolutely sure? Michael nodded. Positive. Either she managed to get out on her own, which I doubt, or someone found her and took her. On the way back, Robert tried to organize his thoughts. He needed to find out what had happened, if she was alive, where she was. When he got home, he told Patricia about the conversation. If she's alive and told someone we're screwed, Patricia said, her voice hysterical. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what they had done. Back at the house in Bridgeport, Eleanor was at the window, looking out at the small backyard. She thought of her large house in the Gold Coast with its expensive furniture, and she realized that none of it meant anything without love, without real connection. Josephine came in with tea. Have you thought about what you'll do after all this is over? Eleanor shook her head. I don't know if I want to go back to my old life. That house, everything reminds me of what I've lost. Josephine held Eleanor's hand. Sometimes God has to take everything from us so we can see what really matters. You've been through a purifying fire, and on the other side, you'll find a new version of yourself. Stronger, wiser, freer. At night after dinner, they all gathered in the living room. Josephine suggested they pray together. Eleanor, who hadn't prayed in so long, joined in the prayers with sincerity. The words felt like a balm. When the house finally fell silent, Eleanor stayed awake for a while, longer. She thought about everything that had happened in the last few days. The betrayal, the abandonment, the unlikely rescue, the unexpected kindness. It was as if her life had been divided into a before and an after. And strangely, the after, despite all the pain and uncertainty, seemed to hold more truth than all of the before. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in a long time, she was thankful. Thankful to be alive. Thankful for the 3 strangers who had become her family when her own family had discarded her. And then, lulled by the feeling that she was no longer alone, Eleanor finally slept, dreaming of gardens full of flowers and the smiling face of a woman in a white dress who pointed toward a path still unknown, but promising. Wednesday dawned with a biting cold that seeped through the window cracks and made the city of Chicago wake up, huddled under blankets and heavy coats. In the Bridgeport house, Josephine was already in the kitchen preparing coffee when she heard firm knocks on the door. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she looked through the peephole, she recognized the face of Dr. Fernanda Davis, the prosecutor, Father Anselm had mentioned days before. "Good morning, Josephine," Fernanda said as the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air with her. "Sorry to come so early, but I have important news." The older woman invited her in, offering hot coffee, which was gratefully accepted. Eleanor was still asleep, slowly recovering from her physical and emotional wounds. but Gabrielle and Raphael were already awake, getting ready for school. "I got the court order," Fernanda began, pulling a folder of documents from her briefcase. "I gained access to the complete medical records Dr. Walter Carter kept on Eleanor, and what I found is absolutely incriminating." The prosecutor opened the folder on the kitchen table, revealing page after page of notes, reports, and prescriptions. Everything here was manipulated to create a profile of mental incompetence that simply doesn't exist. The notes are vague, the tests were administered with bias, and the medication prescriptions are completely disproportionate. Josephine looked at the documents with attentive eyes, even without understanding all the medical terminology. "And is that enough to prove they harmed her?" Fernanda nodded firmly. "It's more than enough. But it doesn't stop there. I also gained access to property records and discovered that, in the last 6 months, Eleanor signed dozens of powers of attorney and asset transfers. The house in the Gold Coast was transferred to Robert's name. Her shares in the company were redistributed between him and Patricia. Bank accounts were emptied. We're talking about an estate estimated at over $20 million. The number made Josephine's eyes widen. 20 million! And they did all this while they were drugging her. The indignation in her voice was palpable. Fernanda confirmed with a nod. "Exactly. And there's more. I also found a petition for guardianship that was being prepared by Patricia's law firm. If everything had gone as they planned, Eleanor would have been declared incompetent, placed under her children's guardianship, and likely committed to a permanent care facility. They would have had total control over everything she built throughout her life." At that moment, Eleanor appeared at the kitchen door, leaning on the frame, pale but alert. She had overheard part of the conversation. 20 million, she repeated, her voice weak. "I didn't even know we had that much. Arthur always handled the finances, and after he was gone, I let Robert take care of everything." Fernanda stood up and helped Eleanor to a seat at the table. "That's exactly why they thought it would be easy. You trusted them, and they took advantage of that trust in the worst possible way." Eleanor held the cup of coffee Josephine offered her, her hand still trembling slightly. "And now? What happens now?" The prosecutor gave a reassuring smile. "Now you will give a formal, recorded deposition with me. I'll record everything, every detail of what happened. Then we'll gather all the witnesses. Irene, who can confirm your mental state before the medication. Father Anselm, who can attest to the social work being done here. The boys who found you and can describe the condition you were in. With that, I'll be able to get search warrants, freeze their assets, and issue arrest warrants." "Arrest?" Eleanor repeated the word, as if she couldn't believe it had come to this. "My children are going to be arrested." The pain in her voice was evident, even after everything they had done. Fernanda touched her hand gently. "I know it's difficult, Eleanor, but what they did wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a serious crime. Manipulation of a vulnerable person, fraud, embezzlement, and attempted, well, what happened that night behind the cemetery has an even more serious name." Eleanor closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face. Josephine came over and hugged her. "It's hard, dear, but justice needs to be done. Not just for you, but for all the other elderly people who might be going through the same thing right now with no one to help. You have a chance to make a difference, to turn this pain into something that can protect others." The words touched Eleanor deeply. She thought of all the times she had read news stories about elderly people being mistreated, abandoned, robbed by their own families, and how it had always seemed so distant, impossible that it could happen to her. And yet, here she was, alive only by a miracle starring 2 12-year-old boys who had followed a dream. "All right," Eleanor said, wiping her tears and straightening her shoulders. "I'll give the deposition. I'll tell them everything." For the next 3 hours, Eleanor recounted her entire story to Fernanda, who recorded everything on audio and video, asking detailed questions, prompting Eleanor to describe dates, conversations, documents, feelings. It was an exhausting and painful process, but a necessary one. Meanwhile, Gabriel and Raphael went to school, but their minds were far from their lessons. They thought about Eleanor, about everything she was facing, about how their lives had changed since that rainy Saturday. During recess, sitting in the schoolyard, Raphael commented to his brother, "Do you think we'll have to talk in front of a judge?" Gabriel shrugged. "If we have to, we will. We'll just tell the truth about what we saw." The truth. That word was echoing in many places that day. In the Gold Coast house, Robert was growing more and more desperate. He couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly. Patricia came over every day, and the two of them would spend hours talking in low voices, trying to figure out what had happened, where their mother could be, if she'd gone to the police, if anyone knew anything. "Maybe she managed to get out on her own and is just wandering around, confused," Patricia suggested, clinging to any possibility that didn't involve the truth coming out. Robert shook his head. "You saw the state she was in. She couldn't have. Someone found her. I'm sure of it. The question is who and what they're going to do with the information." At that very moment, in an office in downtown Chicago, Dr. Walter Carter received an unexpected visit. Two uniformed police officers entered his waiting room, asking to speak with him immediately. The doctor felt a cold sweat run down his back. They had a search warrant. They needed all files related to Eleanor Costa. Dr. Carter tried to appear calm, but his hands trembled as he opened the files on his computer. While the officers copied everything, he thought frantically about how to protect himself, how to distance his name from all of this. But it was too late. Every note he had made, every prescription he had written, every report he had forged was there, recorded, dated, signed by him. When the police finally left, Walter picked up the phone and called Robert. "We need to talk urgently." Was there trouble? Robert's voice on the other end was tense. "The police were here. They took everything about your mother. Someone's investigating." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Robert hung up without another word. At the house in Bridgeport, Fernanda was finishing Eleanor's deposition and packing her equipment. "Eleanor, you were very brave today. I know it wasn't easy to relive all of this. Now I need you to stay here, safe, while I begin the legal proceedings. A lot is going to happen in the next 48 hours. Eleanor nodded, exhausted but strangely relieved. For the first time since it all began, she felt she wasn't alone, that there were people fighting for her, that the truth was finally emerging from the shadows. Fernanda left, but before she went, she had a quick word with Josephine at the gate. "You're doing an incredible job here, taking Eleanor in, protecting her, giving her a safe place to recover. That's more than most people would do." Josephine smiled humbly. "I just did what was right. Besides, her presence here has been a blessing for us too. She helps with chores, talks to the boys, tells stories. She's becoming part of the family." When Gabriel and Raphael got home from school, they found Eleanor in the kitchen helping Josephine prepare dinner. There was something different about her that day. A straighter posture, a firmer gaze, as if the simple act of telling her story out loud had restored a part of her dignity. The boys greeted her and went to do their homework, but before he left, Raphael turned. "Eleanor, are you really okay?" Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "I am, sweetie. I'm better than I've been in a long time." Night fell, bringing with it an even more intense cold. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room. Josephine lit the candle before the image of the Virgin Mary, as she did every night, and suggested they pray together. As the words of the prayer flowed, Eleanor felt something changing inside her. It wasn't just the fear diminishing or the anger transforming. It was something deeper. It was the understanding that, despite all the pain, maybe all of this had a greater purpose. After the prayer, Gabriel asked, "Eleanor, when all this is over, what are you going to do?" Eleanor grew thoughtful. "I don't know yet, Gabriel. My house, my things, it all seems so distant now, like it belongs to someone else, to another life." Raphael, ever practical, suggested, "You could stay here with us. There's room and we like you." The offer touched Eleanor deeply, but she knew she couldn't just stay there indefinitely, depending on the kindness of strangers who had become friends. "Thank you, boys. You have no idea how much that means to me. But when everything is settled, I need to find my own path, a new path, different from the one I had before." Josephine, ever wise, added, The important thing is that you have time to think about it. You don't have to decide anything now. First, we'll resolve this situation with your children. Then you'll discover what God has prepared for the next phase of your life." Eleanor nodded, feeling grateful for this extraordinary woman who seemed to know exactly what she needed to hear at every moment. On Thursday morning, as Chicago awoke to a finally clear sky after days of clouds, important events began to unfold. Fernanda obtained the necessary warrants and, accompanied by a team of police officers, went first to Robert's house in the Gold Coast. It was 7 in the morning when they rang the doorbell. Robert answered in his robe, his eyes swollen from a sleepless night. When he saw the police, his face went pale. "Robert Costa, we have a search and seizure warrant, as well as a subpoena for you to appear at the prosecutor's office today to give a statement regarding your mother, Eleanor Costa." Robert's world collapsed in that instant. He knew it was over. As the police searched the house, collecting documents, computers, phones, Robert sat in the living room that had once belonged to his mother and felt the weight of everything he had done. He thought of his father, Arthur, an honest man who had built everything with hard work. What would his father say if he were alive? The shame was almost unbearable. At the same time, Patricia was receiving police at her apartment and her law office. She tried to use her legal knowledge to delay, question, create obstacles, but it was no use. The warrants were perfectly substantiated, impossible to contest. When she finally understood the gravity of the situation, Patricia began to cry, not tears of genuine remorse, but the tears of someone who realizes they've been caught. Dr. Walter Carter also received his subpoena. When he arrived at the prosecutor's office and saw Fernanda, he knew there was no escape. The prosecutor presented all the evidence she had collected. "Doctor, you have 2 options. You can cooperate, tell us exactly how you were recruited, how much you were paid, what instructions you received, and maybe you can get a deal that minimizes your sentence. Or you can try to deny everything, and we will proceed with a full prosecution where you will be charged as an accomplice to all the crimes committed against Eleanor." Walter, who had lived comfortably for years doing this kind of dirty work for wealthy families who wanted to get rid of inconvenient relatives, realized that this time he had chosen the wrong victims. He hesitated for only a few seconds before he started talking. "Robert approached me 8 months ago. He said his mother was getting in the way of his business, that she was stubborn, that she didn't understand anything about management, but insisted on meddling in everything. He wanted me to declare her incompetent. And you just accepted?" Fernanda's voice was firm, professional, but inside she was seething. Walter lowered his eyes. "He offered me a lot of money, $200,000. And it wasn't the first time I'd done something like that. I'd done it for other families. It had never been a problem." The confession continued, detailing every step of the scheme, every improperly prescribed medication, every forged report, every lie told. Meanwhile, at the house in Bridgeport, Eleanor was having an important conversation with Irene, her former housekeeper. The 2 women, sitting on the small porch drinking coffee, reminisced about the times they worked together in the big house. "You were always so kind to me," Irene said, her eyes welling up. "You treated me like a person, not a servant. That's why I noticed when they started doing that to you. I saw the change, saw how confused you got after the medication, saw how they took advantage. Why didn't you say anything at the time?" Eleanor asked, not with accusation in her voice, just curiosity. Irene sighed. "I tried, Eleanor, but when I told Mr. Robert I was worried about you, he fired me the next day. Said my services were no longer needed. I was scared. I needed the job. I have kids to raise. I felt like a coward." Eleanor took Irene's hand. "You're not a coward. You did what you could. And now you're here helping. That's what matters." The 2 talked for hours, reconstructing, memories, filling in gaps, piecing together the puzzle of those terrible months. Late that afternoon, Fernanda returned to the Bridgeport house with important news. "Robert and Patricia have been formally indicted. Dr. Carter confessed to everything and is cooperating. The assets that were improperly transferred will remain frozen until the case is concluded. You're going to get back everything that was taken from you, Eleanor. And your children will face criminal charges for everything they did." Eleanor listened in silence. She had expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy that justice was being served, but what she felt was a deep and complex sadness. They were her children, the babies she had rocked, nursed, raised. How had they become people capable of such cruelty? Dr. Davis, I want them to pay for what they did. But I also want to understand. I want to look them in the eyes and ask them why. Fernanda nodded. That can be arranged, but the answer might not be the one you want to hear. Sometimes there isn't a good enough reason. Sometimes it's just greed, selfishness, a lack of character, and accepting that can be the hardest part. That night, Josephine, Eleanor, Gabriel, and Raphael had dinner together, as they had every night since Eleanor arrived. But there was a subtle difference in the air, a sense that something was changing, moving towards some kind of conclusion. After dinner, Gabriel took out his old notebook, where he wrote prayers and thoughts. He read aloud something he had written that day. Sometimes God lets us fall into the deepest hole just so we can find out that we can still look up and see the stars, and that there's always someone willing to throw down a rope to help us climb back out. Eleanor felt the tears come, but she let them fall freely. They were tears of healing, of transformation. When everyone finally retired for the night, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the small room that had become her refuge. She thought of Arthur, her beloved husband who had left too soon. She thought of the children she had raised and who had betrayed her. She thought of the comfortable but empty life she had led before. And she thought of these last few days, in this simple house with these extraordinary people who had taken her in without asking for anything in return. Something was being born inside her, an idea, still vague, still without a definite shape, but that pulsed with growing strength. If she had survived all of this for a reason, if she had been saved by a miracle that involved 2 boys following a dream, then her life needed to have a greater purpose from now on. It wasn't enough to just get her assets back and go back to living as before. She had to transform all that pain into something meaningful. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in decades, made a promise to herself. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she was going to use everything she had been through to make a difference in other people's lives. She was going to honor the miracle she had received by creating her own miracles for others in need. On the other side of the city, Robert was also awake, but his thoughts were very different. He looked at the walls of the luxurious house that was now his, but would soon be taken back. He thought about how he would explain everything to his children, to his friends, to his business partners. The shame was overwhelming, and for the first time since it all began, Robert wondered if $20 million was really worth losing his own soul. But it was too late for regrets. The train had already derailed, and all that was left was to wait for the final impact. On Friday, Eleanor woke up with a strange feeling. It was as if her body knew, even before her mind processed it, that this would be a definitive day. She got up slowly, still feeling aches, but much better than in the first few days, and went to the kitchen, where she found Josephine already awake, as always. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" The question came with a steaming cup of coffee. Eleanor accepted it and sat at the table. "I dreamed of Arthur last night. It's been so long since I dreamed of him. In the dream he was smiling, telling me I was stronger than I thought." Josephine nodded, as if she understood perfectly. Those who have passed have a way of showing up when we need them most. It's a sign that he's proud of you, of how you're facing all this. The 2 women were silent for a moment, each lost in her own thoughts. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice filled with emotion. "Josephine, I need to tell you something. When all this is over, when I get back what's mine, I want to do something important. I don't want to just go back to my old life, pretend nothing happened. I want to use what I've been through to help others. But I don't know exactly how yet." Josephine took Eleanor's hand across the table. "You'll know at the right time. God shows us the way when we're ready to walk it. And you're almost there, I can feel it." Eleanor nodded, feeling tears of gratitude well up. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. You saved me in a way that goes far beyond the physical. You gave me back the will to live, to believe that there's still goodness in the world." "No need to thank me, dear. We did what any person with a heart would do." And besides, you've brought good things to our home too. The boys have learned important lessons with you here. About courage, about forgiveness, about not giving up even when everything seems lost. Later that morning, Fernanda called with news that Eleanor had been expecting, but that still made her tremble. Eleanor, the judge has authorized a supervised meeting between you and your children. It will be at the prosecutor's office with me and a psychologist present. It's an opportunity for you to say what you need to say, to hear what they have to say. Do you feel ready? Eleanor took a deep breath. Yes, I need to do this. I need to look them in the eyes and understand. The meeting was set. For that afternoon, Josephine offered to go with her, and Eleanor gratefully accepted. She needed that strong, serene presence by her side. When they arrived at the prosecutor's office, Eleanor felt her legs go weak. There in the waiting room was Robert. Her eldest son looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. His eyes were sunken, his face pale, his posture stooped. When he saw his mother, he stood up abruptly, and for a moment it looked like he would run to her. But he stood frozen, tears streaming silently down his face. "Mom," he managed to say, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry." Eleanor looked at him, her heart torn between the motherly love she still felt and the pain of the betrayal she had suffered. "Robert, why? That's the only thing I need to understand. Why?" They were led into a room where Patricia was already waiting. Her daughter was also visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying. When she saw her mother, she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't want it to come to this, Mom. I swear I didn't." Eleanor sat in the chair offered to her, Josephine remaining standing, by her side like a silent guardian angel. "Then explain it to me. Make me understand how we got here." What followed were two of the most painful hours of Eleanor's life. Robert told her about the debts he had accumulated from bad investments, about how he had started to see his mother as the solution to his financial problems. Patricia revealed her involvement, how she had used her legal knowledge to create the entire legal framework that would allow them to appropriate their mother's assets without raising suspicion. But the worst part wasn't the technical details. The worst part was realizing that at no point had they considered how much it would hurt her. To them, she was simply an obstacle, a problem to be solved. The person she was, with feelings, fears, dreams, had been completely erased in favor of greed. "You left me tied up behind a cemetery to die," Eleanor said, her voice firm despite her tears. "That wasn't just greed. It was cruelty. It was inhumanity. How could you do that to me?" Robert was sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't think it would come to that, Mom. Michael said he was just going to scare you, that he'd leave you there for a while and then come back for you. I didn't know he was going to leave you tied up, without food, without water." Eleanor felt anger explode inside her. "You trusted a stranger to do that to your own mother? You didn't even have the courage to do it yourself. You outsourced the cruelty?" The silence that followed was crushing. Fernanda, who had remained quiet until then, finally intervened. "Eleanor, is there anything else you'd like to say to them?" Eleanor looked at her two children for a long time. "Yes, I want you to know that despite everything I still love you. But a mother's love doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't justify it. It doesn't automatically forgive it. You will have to face the consequences of your actions, and I will move on with my life, rebuild, find my own path. Without you, at least for now. Maybe one day, if you truly change, if you show genuine remorse through actions and not just words, we can try to rebuild something. But that's a long way off." Patricia stood up and tried to hug her mother, but Eleanor stepped back. "No, not yet. You need to understand that's not how it works. You can't destroy a person and expect them to hug you the next day. You have a long road ahead of you, if you ever want my forgiveness." When Eleanor left the prosecutor's office with Josephine, she felt strangely light despite the pain. She had said what she needed to say, had looked them in the eyes and seen what they truly were. And now she could move on. The following Monday, Eleanor returned to her house in the Gold Coast for the first time, accompanied by Fernanda and court officers. The house was exactly as she remembered, but at the same time it felt completely alien, as if it belonged to someone else, to another life. She walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, the curtains, the objects she had chosen with such care over the years, but she felt no attachment. She felt no desire to live there again. That big, cold house held too many bad memories now. She turned to Fernanda. "I want to sell it. Everything. The house, the furniture, everything. I want to start over, somewhere else." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor, accompanied by lawyers recommended by Fernanda, began the process of fully recovering her assets. The legal procedures were complex and time-consuming, but she was determined. Meanwhile, she continued to live at the house in Bridgeport, helping Josephine with chores, talking with Gabriel and Raphael, participating in the simple life of the family that had taken her in. It was during one of these conversations with the boys that the idea finally took clear shape in her mind. Gabriel had asked what she would do with all the money when she got it back. Eleanor was thoughtful for a moment, and then she smiled. "You know, Gabriel, I think I've figured it out. I'm going to create a place where elderly people who have been abandoned, mistreated, forgotten, can find shelter, care, dignity. A place where children and young people can also be, learning, growing, understanding that age is no reason to discard someone." Raphael's eyes widened. "Like a big house where everyone lives together." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. A house where we don't separate the generations, where the older ones teach the younger ones, where everyone takes care of each other. And I'm going to call it the House of New Beginnings, because that's what we all deserve, no matter how many times life knocks us down, a chance to start over." Josephine, who had overheard the conversation from the kitchen, came in with her eyes shining. "What a beautiful idea, Eleanor. And you know what? I want to help. I may not have money, but I have experience in taking care of people, in turning a house into a home." Eleanor hugged her, feeling emotion overflow. "It would be an honor to have you with me on this project." And so amidst the ruins of a family, destroyed by greed, something new and beautiful began to grow. A purpose, a mission, a way to transform pain into healing, not just for herself, but for many others to come. 3 years had passed since that cold dawn when Gabriel and Raphael found Eleanor tied up behind the cemetery. 3 years that completely transformed the lives of everyone involved in that story that seemed impossible, but was absolutely real. The House of New Beginnings was located on a large property in the Beverly neighborhood, not far from Bridgeport. It was a welcoming, single-story building with wide porches, well-tended gardens, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Eleanor had used a significant portion of her recovered assets to buy the land and build this space that would become much more than just a shelter. It was a place of healing, connection, and hope. Eleanor was on the main porch that Saturday morning, watching the activity in the garden. Josephine was leading a group of children and teenagers who were helping to plant vegetable seedlings in the community garden. Gabriel and Raphael, now 15, were among them, taller, more mature, but with the same kind glow in their eyes. Alongside them, 4 elderly residents were also working, some sitting on adapted stools, others standing, all laughing and talking as they worked the soil. This was how the House of New Beginnings worked. It wasn't a traditional nursing home where the elderly were isolated, passive, just waiting. It was an intergenerational living space where people of all ages lived, worked, and grew together. There were 23 permanent residents, 15 elderly people who had been abandoned or mistreated by their families, and 8 children and teenagers in vulnerable social situations. In addition, the house hosted about 30 young people from the neighborhood during the day for workshops, tutoring, and cultural activities. Eleanor had taken on the overall coordination of the project, but never alone. Josephine was the educational coordinator, responsible for all activities with the children and youth. Irene, the former housekeeper, who had testified against Robert and Patricia, worked as the head cook, running a kitchen that fed everyone with care and dedication. Father Anselm visited weekly, offering spiritual support to anyone who wanted it. And Fernanda, the prosecutor who had fought for Eleanor's justice, had become a volunteer legal advisor for the project, helping other elderly victims of violence recover their rights. The story of how they got there wasn't simple. The legal case against Robert and Patricia took almost 2 years to conclude. In the end, both were convicted of manipulation of a vulnerable adult, aggravated embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Robert received a sentence of 12 years, to be served initially in a maximum security prison. Patricia, having cooperated more effectively with the justice system and shown more genuine remorse, received 8 years, with the possibility of serving part of it in a work release program. Dr. Walter Carter permanently lost his medical license and was sentenced to 6 years in prison for his role in the scheme. Michael, the man hired to abandon Eleanor, was also arrested and convicted. The story received widespread media attention in Chicago and even nationally, sparking important debates about elder abuse, financial manipulation, and family abandonment. But for Eleanor, the real milestone wasn't her children's conviction. It was the moment, a few months after the sentencing, when Patricia asked to see her. Her daughter was serving her sentence in a halfway house, working during the day at a free legal aid office, and returning to the correctional facility at night. When Eleanor arrived for the visit, she found a profoundly changed Patricia. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a genuine humility that was evident in every gesture. "Mom," Patricia began, her voice choked with emotion, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know what we did was unforgivable, but I needed to tell you that these months in prison have made me see who I really became, and I hate that person. Every day I wake up and can't believe I was capable of doing that to you, to my own mother." Eleanor listened in silence, watching her daughter attentively. Patricia continued, "I'm in therapy here, I'm volunteering, helping other incarcerated women understand their rights. I'm studying again, trying to rebuild myself from the inside out. I'm not doing this to reduce my sentence or to impress anyone. I'm doing it because I need to be able to look in the mirror and not feel disgusted with myself." There was a long silence. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Patricia, I'm not going to tell you that I completely forgive you. It still hurts too much. I still have nightmares about that night. I still find myself shaking when I remember the ropes, the cold, the certainty that I was going to die alone. But I will also tell you that you are my daughter, and a part of me, as much as it hurts, still wants to believe that you can truly change. So I'll make you a proposal. Continue the work you're doing, continue to transform yourself. And when you get out, if you still want to, you can come work at the House of New Beginnings. Not to automatically become my daughter again, but to show through your actions that the change is real." Patricia cried uncontrollably, nodding without being able to speak. Robert, on the other hand, took much longer to come to any kind of awareness of his actions. In the first few visits Eleanor made, he still tried to justify himself, to blame circumstances, to minimize his responsibility. Eleanor was patient, but firm. "I won't accept excuses, Robert. What you did was a choice. And until you understand that and take full responsibility, we can't even begin to talk about forgiveness." It took almost a year, but eventually something broke inside Robert. Maybe it was the isolation of prison. Maybe the loss of everything he considered important, status, money, respect. Or maybe it was simply the weight of his conscience, which eventually demands its price. When he finally asked to see his mother and said, without beating around the bush, "Mum, I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed my sister. I destroyed my own life. And it was all for pure greed. There's no excuse, no justification. I was a monster." Eleanor saw sincerity in his eyes for the first time in years. She didn't promise immediate forgiveness. She didn't offer easy reconciliation. But she said she was willing to stay in touch, to follow his journey of transformation, to consider the possibility of one day in the future rebuilding some kind of relationship. Not like before. Never again like before, but maybe something new, built on a foundation of truth and responsibility. Back at the House of New Beginnings, Eleanor found her true family, Not the family of blood that had betrayed her, but the family of the heart that had chosen to stand by her side. Josephine had become her best friend, her confidant, her partner in every important decision. Gabriel and Raphael were like grandsons to her. She had watched the boys grow, helped with their studies, given advice on girlfriends and career dreams. The other residents of the house also became an essential part of her life. There was Mr. Waldemar, an 82-year-old man who had been abandoned by his children in a dilapidated nursing home, and who now spent his days playing the guitar and teaching music to the children. There was Mrs. Davis, 76, an excellent seamstress who ran a craft workshop where young people learned to create items that were sold at fairs, generating income for the house. There was also Chris, a 16-year-old who had arrived at the house 2 years ago, rebellious and distrustful, and who was now studying hard, dreaming of going to engineering school. Each one had a story. Each one carried wounds. But there, in that space of welcome and dignity, they were all learning that it was possible to start over, no matter their age or the depth of their pain. The House of New Beginnings had become a benchmark in Chicago. Fernanda used the project's experience in her lectures and classes on the rights of the elderly. Universities sent social work and psychology students to do internships there. Newspapers and television programs ran stories about their work, and most importantly, other cities began to replicate the model, creating their own houses of new beginnings. But for Eleanor, the most significant victories weren't the public ones. They were the small daily miracles. It was seeing Mr. Waldemar teach a child to play their first song on the guitar. It was hearing Mrs. Davis laugh at something Gabriel said. It was watching Chris study late into the night, determined to build a better future. It was feeling that, from the tragedy that had almost killed her, something genuinely good and transformative had been born. On a September morning, exactly 3 years after the day she was found by the twins, Eleanor organized a special celebration at the house. She invited all the residents, volunteers, partners, and friends. Father Anselm celebrated an outdoor mass in the garden. Afterward, there was a community lunch where everyone brought something to share. Late in the afternoon, when everyone was gathered on the large porch, Eleanor asked to speak. She looked at the people who had become her true family and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. 3 years ago, I was in the darkest place a person can be, abandoned by my own children, tied up, cold, scared, thinking my story was going to end right there, in the worst possible way. But then something happened that I can only call a miracle. She looked at Gabriel and Raphael, who were sitting next to their grandmother. 2 boys had a dream that led them to me. They didn't know me. They had no obligation to do anything. But they did. They untied me, warmed me, took me to their home. And this extraordinary woman, she pointed to, Josephine, took me in without asking a single question, without hesitating, without asking for anything in return. Eleanor's voice broke for a moment. She wiped her tears and continued, "You saved me. But more than that, you showed me that real goodness exists in this world, that there are people who do the right thing simply because it's right, not because they'll gain something from it. And you made me want to be better too. You made me want to turn pain into healing, tragedy into purpose." She paused, looking around at all the attentive faces. "And that's why this house exists, because every one of us here knows what it's like to be discarded, abandoned, considered worthless. But we also know that's a lie. Every person has immense value. Every life matters. Every new beginning is possible. And as long as we have the strength, we will continue to prove it day after day, through every hug given, every meal shared, every smile exchanged." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Then Josephine stood up and hugged Eleanor. The others joined in, forming a group hug that summed up everything that place meant: connection, belonging, love. When night fell and the visitors had gone, only the permanent residents of the house remained. Gabriel and Raphael would sleep there that night, as they did every weekend. Sitting on the porch under a clear, starry sky, the group talked about plans for the future. "We're thinking of expanding," Eleanor said, "buying the lot next door and building more rooms. There are so many people who need help, and we can still only serve so few." Mr. Waldemar agreed. but we can't grow too fast and lose our essence. What makes this place special isn't its size, it's the care. It's every person being seen, known, loved. Gabriel, always observant, commented, "You know what I think is coolest about the house? It's that in here, nobody is just old or just young. We're all just people. Mixed together, living together, learning from each other. Outside, people separate everything. Kids stay with kids, old people stay with old people. But here it's different." Raphael added, "It's like the house proves that life is better when we don't separate the generations, when the older ones teach the younger ones and the younger ones bring energy to the older ones." Eleanor smiled. "Exactly, that's what I felt in those first few days at your grandmother's house. I was a 74-year-old woman. You were 12-year-old boys. But we connected in a real way because we didn't care about those artificial divisions." Josephine, who had joined the group on the porch, added her usual wisdom. "Society forgets that it used to be this way. Families had grandparents living in the same house, taking care of the grandkids, teaching, telling stories. Everyone grew up together. Now they want to separate everything, put each age in its own box. But that impoverishes everyone. The old are left alone and forgotten. The young grow up without role models, without history, without roots." Eleanor agreed thoughtfully. "And the worst part is that many families don't even realize what they're losing. They put their elderly parents in nursing homes, not necessarily because they're bad people, but because society has taught them that's how it's done, that it's normal, that it's even better for the elderly person. But the truth is, the vast majority of elderly people don't want to be isolated from family and life. They want to participate, contribute, feel useful and loved." The conversation naturally drifted to the challenges they still faced. Despite the success of the House of New Beginnings, Eleanor knew it was just a drop in the ocean. Millions of elderly people across the United States suffered from abandonment, mistreatment, and financial abuse. Every week, requests for help arrived that she couldn't meet due to lack of space or resources. It was Chris, the teenager who dreamed of being an engineer, who suggested, "What if we created a training course? Like, teach other people and institutions how to replicate the house's model. That way, instead of trying to help everyone directly, we multiply the impact." Eleanor looked at the boy with admiration. "Chris, that's a brilliant idea. Why don't you develop it? It could be your high school senior project." Chris's eyes lit up. "Really? I can do that?" Eleanor smiled. "Of course. You have a talent for organization and planning. And besides, you've lived firsthand the difference a place like this can make. Who better to teach others?" In the weeks following that conversation, Chris dedicated himself intensely to the project. He created presentations, manuals, flowcharts. He showed everything to Eleanor, who refined things here and there, but let the boy take the lead. When he finally presented the complete project to the entire house, everyone was impressed with the depth and quality of his work. From then on, the House of New Beginnings began offering training courses. Social workers, psychologists, and managers of institutions from all over Illinois and other states came to spend weeks learning the model. Josephine taught about the importance of intergenerational living. Mr. Waldemar spoke about giving purpose and activity to the elderly. Irene shared how to create a kitchen of care that nourished both body and soul, and Eleanor told her own story, without omitting the painful details, to show why this work was so urgent and necessary. During one of these courses, a social worker from Wisconsin approached Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "My grandmother went through something similar to you. My uncle tried to take everything from her. I was a child. I couldn't do anything. She passed away alone, sad, believing she was worthless. I became a social worker because of her. And now, seeing the house, I'm going back to my city and creating something similar. I'm going to honor my grandmother by helping other people like her." Eleanor hugged the young woman, feeling that the circle was closing in some way. This is why we exist, so that other stories can have a different ending, so that no elderly person has to go through what I went through, and so that no child has to carry the guilt of not being able to protect someone they loved. The impact of the House of New Beginnings surpassed even Eleanor's most optimistic expectations. 2 years after its inauguration, There were already 12 houses inspired by the original model spread across 6 states, and the number kept growing. Fernanda used the data and results in her campaigns for more effective public policies for the protection of the elderly. She managed to get a state law passed that required stricter oversight of long-term care facilities and created specific channels for reporting cases of elder abuse. But for Eleanor, the greatest victories remained the personal and quiet ones. Like the day Mrs. Davis, who had arrived at the house mute from so much accumulated suffering, began to sing again. Or when Mr. Waldemar, who used to say his life no longer had purpose, saw one of his teenage students play the guitar at a school performance and cried, with pride. Or when Chris received the news that he had been accepted into civil engineering with a full scholarship and ran to hug Eleanor, shouting, "I did it, Eleanor. I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to build houses so we never have to leave anyone out again." And there was also the day when Patricia, after serving her sentence and proving through years of dedicated work that she had truly changed, finally received the hug she had waited so long for. It wasn't a complete and instant forgiveness. Wounds that deep don't heal overnight, but it was a start. A recognition that perhaps with a lot of time and a lot of effort, some kind of relationship could be rebuilt. Robert took longer, much longer, but when he finally got out of prison 5 years after he went in, he was a completely different man. He had studied, worked, undergone intensive therapy, and most importantly, he had truly understood the gravity of what he had done. Eleanor didn't invite him to work at the house. That would be too much. But she agreed to have lunch with him once a month. They talked. Robert listened more than he spoke. He learned. He tried day after day to prove that he had changed. A year into these monthly lunches, Robert came with a proposal. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to have you back in my life. But I want to do something useful. I have some money saved from before all this happened. I want to donate it to the House of New Beginnings. And I want to volunteer. Not here where you are, that would be too uncomfortable, but at one of the other houses that have been created. I want to help. I want to try somehow to balance out a little of the harm I caused." The conversation continued late into the night, touching on subjects both profound and trivial, serious and funny. When everyone finally retired to bed, Eleanor stayed a little longer on the porch, alone with her thoughts. She thought about everything that had happened in the last 3 years. The transformations were countless. Gabriel and Raphael were no longer the scared boys who found her behind the cemetery. They were conscious, compassionate young men who had chosen to follow paths of helping others. Gabriel wanted to be a psychologist, to work with vulnerable children. Raphael dreamed of being a social educator. Both were already regular volunteers at the house, and Eleanor knew that, no matter where life took them, they would always carry the values that Josephine and Claire, even in her absence, had taught them. Josephine, now 71, seemed to have grown younger with her work at the house. She had the energy of someone 20 years younger, was always involved in some project, always thinking of ways to improve their services, to reach more people. And the bond between her and Eleanor had become so deep that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. They were partners, friends, soul sisters. Irene was also flourishing. She had discovered she had a talent not just for cooking, but for organizing and teaching. She had created a series of cooking workshops where she taught traditional recipes to the youth of the house and the community. She always said that food made with love had the power to heal, and everyone who tasted her meals agreed. And there were so many others. Every person who passed through the house left their mark and took with them something that transformed their life. Some stayed for a few months until they got back on their feet. Others, like Mr. Waldemar and Mrs. Davis, had found their permanent home there and had no intention of ever leaving. Eleanor had changed too. At 77, she felt more alive and useful than at any other time in her adult life. She woke up every day with a purpose, a mission, with the certainty that her life mattered and made a difference. The physical marks of that terrible night behind the cemetery had faded with time, but the emotional marks, those remained. Not as open wounds, but as scars that told a story of survival, of overcoming, of rebirth. There were difficult days, of course, Days when the longing for Arthur squeezed her chest. Days when the sadness over the destroyed relationship with her children weighed heavily. Days when exhaustion hit, and she wondered how long she could keep up this pace. But even on those difficult days, all she had to do was look around, see the lives being transformed, hear the laughter of a child playing with an elderly resident in the garden, smell the aroma of Irene's cooking coming from the kitchen. And Eleanor remembered why it was all worth it. The house had become more than a social project. It had become a movement, a living testament that there was another way to grow old in this country, that the elderly didn't have to be discarded, that generations could and should live together. That family wasn't just about blood, but about choice, care, presence. Eleanor had gotten up that morning, as she did every Saturday, to welcome a group of visitors interested in learning about the project. There were 7 people, 3 managers from a group of private nursing homes in New York, 2 university professors researching active aging, and 2 sisters who were caring for their elderly mother at home and seeking guidance. As she showed them the facilities, explained the philosophy, and introduced the residents, Eleanor saw in the visitors' eyes that same expression she knew so well, surprise mixed with emotion. Surprise because the House of New Beginnings was so different from any facility for the elderly they had ever known. And emotion because they saw concrete proof that it was possible to do things differently, to do better. One of the sisters caring for her, Mother, approached Eleanor at the end of the visit, holding her hands tightly. "You have no idea how much this inspires me. I've been caring for my mother for 5 years, ever since she had a heart attack. Some days are so hard, I feel tired, frustrated. And my siblings keep suggesting I put her in a nursing home. They say I'm wasting my life. But looking at you, seeing everything you've built here, I understand that caring isn't a waste. It's an investment. It's love. It's what makes us human." Eleanor hugged the woman, feeling her tears wet her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, and when it gets too hard, seek help. There are caregiver support groups, respite services, options. You don't have to do it all alone, and your mother is lucky to have a daughter like you." After the visitors left, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea. It was mid-afternoon, the September sun shining softly through the clouds. She watched the garden where some children were playing tag with Mrs. Davis, who was laughing as much as they were. She saw Mr. Waldemar teaching guitar to a new boy who had arrived the week before. She heard the buzz from the kitchen where Irene was leading the dinner preparations with the help of 3 teenagers. This was it. This was exactly what she had dreamed of creating. A space where no one was disposable, where everyone had value, where age didn't determine your usefulness or dignity. A place that proved every single day that a miracle was not only possible, but real and replicable. Gabriel came over and sat beside her. "Eleanor, I was just thinking, when I finish my psychology degree, I want to come back and work at the house, not as a volunteer, but as a professional. Coordinate the psychological services, develop programs, that kind of thing." Eleanor looked at the boy, who was now a tall, serious 15-year-old, with the same kind eyes as always. "It would be an honor to have you on the team, Gabriel, but promise me one thing. Don't do it just for me or out of gratitude. Do it because it's really what you want, because you feel it's your calling." Gabriel smiled. "It is my calling. I discovered that the day we found you, the day I learned that saving a life isn't just about stopping someone from breathing. It's about giving them reasons to want to keep breathing. And that's what the house does. It gives us reasons to keep going." Raphael, who had joined the conversation, added, "And I'm going to do my social education internship here too when the time comes. The 3 of us started this story together. It would be cool to finish it together too." Eleanor laughed, though her eyes were misty. "It's not going to finish, boys. It's going to continue long after I'm gone. This house will exist for generations. You'll run it. You'll teach others, and those others will teach more others. The miracle will multiply." She thought of Arthur, her beloved husband, and imagined what he would say if he could see all of this. He would probably smile that way of his, proud but discreet, and say that he always knew she was strong enough to weather any storm. She thought of Robert and Patricia. The pain was still there, probably always would be, but it was no longer a pain that paralyzed her. It was a pain she had learned to carry to transform into wisdom. She looked up at the stars, so bright in the clear night sky, and gave thanks. She was thankful for life, for a second chance, for the miracles disguised as 12-year-old boys, for the kindness of strangers who became family. For every day she woke up in that house and saw hope being reborn in the eyes of people who thought all was lost. 3 years earlier, tied up and cold behind a cemetery, Eleanor had asked only for a little more time. Time to understand, time to find meaning. And the universe, God, fate, whatever she wanted to call it, had granted her much more than that. It had granted her purpose. It had granted her healing. It had granted her a new family and a mission that gave meaning to every breath. She stood up slowly and went inside the house. She passed by the quiet rooms where people slept peacefully, protected, cared for, loved. She stopped at the door of Gabriel and Raphael's room and watched them for a moment, those boys who were now almost men, but who still slept with the same serene expression of childhood. She finally reached her own room, simple but cozy. Before getting into bed, she lit a candle before a small image of the Virgin Mary that Josephine had given her. The flame flickered for an instant and then burned steady and constant, softly illuminating the room. Eleanor smiled. She remembered the candle Josephine had lit on that first night, the candle that had gone out and relit itself, the sign that something greater was at work. The candle had never gone out on its own again. It continued to burn, night after night, a silent witness that miracles happen, that goodness exists, that there is always hope. She finally lay down, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders. Outside, Chicago slept under its oak trees. Inside, at the House of New Beginnings, 23 people rested, knowing that in the morning they would wake up in a place where they were valued, where they belonged, where their lives mattered. And Eleanor, the woman who had survived the worst kind of betrayal and transformed that pain into a love that overflowed into dozens of lives, slept in peace. She dreamed of gardens full of flowers, of children's laughter mixed with the stories of the elderly, of a long table where everyone fit, where no one was left out. She dreamed of Arthur smiling and saying he was proud. She dreamed of Gabriel and Raphael's mother, that Claire she had never met but always felt was present, pointing forward, to the future, to all the possibilities yet to come. Because a new beginning wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and she was walking it, one step at a time, surrounded by people she had chosen to love and who had chosen to love her back. And that, Eleanor now knew with absolute certainty, was more valuable than any mansion in the Gold Coast, than any bank account, than any material thing she could ever possess. The real miracle wasn't just surviving, it was discovering, through pain, fear, and helplessness, that life had so much more to offer than she had ever imagined, and that it was never, ever too late to start over. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor, Gabriel, Raphael, and Josephine has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of survival, kindness, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Was it the miracle of the boys who followed a dream? Was it the kindness of Josephine who welcomed a stranger without hesitation? Was it the transformation of Eleanor who turned pain into purpose? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, reminding us that there is always hope, that miracles happen through simple acts of kindness, and that it's never too late to start over. The House of New Beginnings exists in every heart that refuses to give up, in every hand extended to help, in every second chance we offer ourselves and others. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and renew your faith in humanity. Until then.